we lost our light. But let's do a good old-fashioned resolution test. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take an image here of the maroon bells. Try to get everything as locked down as I can, just like before. Get the thing. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and do on the meter, whatever each respective camera is saying is the meter, which is 1/6 of a second. So I'm definitely going to want a 2-second shutter. And for some reason it's making noise. Oh, that's fun. I'm gonna have to turn that off. Let's do one more. All right, let's check focus on that. And boom. Looks to be in perfect focus. So let's just swap them out. That's at 70 millimeters. So I'll just carefully swap them out here. So a note that I'm just noticing here as we're shooting, that these cameras started with full batteries and the good old Z8 is already one thing down. So that's just funny to me. Oh, Z8's getting lucky.
Set these hills on fire. Set these hills on fire.
These cameras represent, in my opinion, the best options from Nikon and Sony for landscape photography. And I don't actually know how many people are out there trying to decide between Nikon and Sony for landscape photography, but I'm sure there are lots of you out here. So I wanted to take this opportunity while I had both cameras in our Summit Bid studios to basically do a head-to-head comparison of what makes one of these cameras better than the other for landscape photography. And like, as I've been using them both at the same time, which is granted a little bit annoying, but also super kind of fun. We just came down off of Frigid Air Pass and did some shooting up there, got some amazing stuff. It was so cool. And it was cool shooting with both cameras. So this video is going to be, a lot of it's going to be my opinion, but I'm going to try to be as objective as I possibly can in comparing these two cameras and what makes one better than the other for landscape photography. Does the 61 megapixels of the A7R5 make it an instant win for the A7R5? Does the ergonomics and the design of the Nikon Z8 make it just more usable, where it's easier to get better shots with the Nikon Z8? You know, that's the kind of questions I think that a prospective landscape photographer might be asking about these cameras. And then there's the huge question of, like, who has the better lenses? Like, you know, this is the new 7200 f4 on Sony, which is smaller and lighter than anything we've had before with a telephoto range at image quality like that. But you have the amazing 24-120 on the Nikon Z8, a one and done amazing landscape lens. So we're going to talk about that. Right now, we're going to jump back up to Frigid Air Pass and continue our shoot of that amazing sunset with both cameras. And you can kind of get some of my live thoughts on those two cameras while I'm shooting with them. I'm shooting at 70 millimeters. So this is the first shot that we're gonna do from this location from both cameras. I'm shooting at 70 millimeters, and the reason why I'm shooting this direction, I mean, there's obviously awesome stuff going on all around us with the maroon bells. Not your classic view of the maroon bells, but extremely cool. I'm actually shooting in this direction because I want to get a very high dynamic range scene here. So basically I have the Z8 right now. It's metering a stop under to get the sky basically not blown out. I just have the sky off of the right side of the histogram. So I'm just gonna take a couple shots. Yeah, really cool scene, really cool scene. So we're locked down. So I'm just going to pop the Z8 off. All right. And here is A7R5. Now this one's going to be easy. It's 70. This is the just recently released 70-200 f4 G2. Okay, and I'm gonna stop under as well here on the A7R5. So my histogram, you can come on, show a look at the back here. My histogram is, they look somewhat similar, but the histogram's just right off the right side because the sky is so close to blowing out. So this is, I believe that is snow mass. So you can do the whole valley. Yeah, now it's so I think that's a good high dynamic range shot. Oh, this is actually turning out into, that's cool. Let's see if we can do a dual one over there. This is, that's actually kind of a cool, accidentally cool comp. Those rocks in the foreground, not where to focus is tricky. Let's see. I went, whoop, used to the Z8. Okay. All right, so that's in focus. All right, let's lock it down. I am not going to drop a camera doing this. That was at 90? I should have done a marker. Oh well. This is not how I normally do things, as you can tell, like switching cameras. Like, that screen is so nice. So I have to say, I am enjoying the Z8's back screen.
What shutter speed are you shooting at right now?
That's a good question. A quarter of a second.
Do you feel like it was the same on the A7R5?
No, it was a little faster because I'm at ISO 100 instead of ISO 64. Because I'm shooting both at base. I mean, I figure, like.
That's what you got to do, right?
Yep, gotta shoot.
What a landscape photographer would do.
Give it. Actually, I'm actually going to give it a little more light. So I'm going down a half second. I think it's a very.
Ooh. What do you think about like some of the clouds over behind you? Ooh, some snow masses clouds.
Snow masses clouds do look maybe
This is
nicest.
very chaotic. Everything but the maroon bells looks amazing right now. I mean, the maroon bells, you look amazing. They look amazing.
Yeah, be nice to the maroon bells. Jeez.
Yes, goodness. They look great. There's just no clouds over the bells right now.
Okay, so going all the way out to 120 here. It is very high dynamic range. Let's go ahead and lock it down. I would definitely zoom in more if I had it on the. So 1/6 of a second f8 ISO 64. Let's try it on. Let's try to figure out what 120 is. A7RV. It's not a bad shooting experience on the back here. It's just not. For some reason, the composition. I must have bumped something because it changed. Oh. So let's talk about some of the lenses you might be thinking about for landscape photography. So on the Nikon side, well, there's the 24-120 here, right here, which is the main lens I have shot on the Nikon Z8. I also shot with the 100-400, which is also a phenomenal lens. Now, I'm going to have reviews in the description of any of these Nikon lenses that I'm talking about if I've made a review for them. So please check that out. There's going to be a whole, honestly, maybe I should just make a playlist of reviews that are kind of affiliated with this. So yeah, 24-120, a phenomenal lens, a great focal range. What's nice about the 24-120 is it's kind of a one and done. You have such a big focal range that it's easy to stick it in a pack and, you know, get basically anything you would need in a landscape photography setting. You also have, I also mentioned the 100-400. You also have a 14-30 f4, which is a great lens that takes standard 82mm filters, so that's super good. You have a 14-24 2.8, an Astro Beast, a wide angle beast, and it has a nifty filter system as well, with it built into the hood. You have the 24-70, which I've done a review on, that I love the image quality on that lens. 24-70 2.8 and an f4 one when I haven't used. So that being said, I think for landscape photography, if that's the main thing you're shooting, the 24-120 is a better option than either of those. As much as I love the 24-70, it's just smaller, lighter, better range, and very, very similar image quality. So I'm just gonna kind of say that off the bat. And then you have the excellent 70-200. The problem with the Nikon 70-200 isn't the image quality, it's that it's very big and heavy. Sony's 70-200 is maybe similarly sized, but it is much lighter and, in my opinion, a little bit sharper. So if 70-200 is one of the things you're looking at that you want, I have to say the Sony's is just a little bit better, and that's the 2.8 that I'm talking about. This is the f4, which I have not used enough to really build an opinion on yet. For Sony, you have so many options. For your standard zoom, you have this nifty little guy. This is the 20-70 f4, and look how small and light it is. It's pocketable. I have been extremely impressed with this little lens, and it has the aperture ring. I've been extremely impressed with this little lens, and I love that it goes out to 20. That little bit wider, which as a landscape photographer is very advantageous. Then you have the new 70-200 f4, which seems like it's good, but full opinion coming. And you have the 100-400, which is not as good as Nikon's, just because I think it's a little older. I think it's probably due for a refresh in the next couple of years, I would think. That's coming for Sony. They're kind of refreshing all of the original G Master glass. So the 100-400 is not as strong as Nikon's in image quality. It's just not quite as strong. Maybe at 400, they're pretty similar, interestingly, but from 100 to 300, the Nikon blows it out of the water, sharpness wise. But you do have 100-400. You have that excellent 70-200 2.8. That is just like a bunch of primes. You have a small and light 24-70 2.8, again for landscape photography. I mean, it's a little sharper. I did actually use those lenses at the same time for just a second earlier this year, basically one shoot. But this guy's close, and you have a little more versatility, and it's even still a little smaller and lighter. So this 20-70, I still think I would recommend over that. At the wide end, you have a 16-35 2.8 that I've used for tons of work. I'm going to show some of the shots that I've taken with that 16-35 2.8. It's great. It's a little big and heavy for some of their modern G Master glass. I think it's going to be refreshed. Honestly, it may have been refreshed the same week that this video goes up, if the rumors are correct. So there's a Generation 2 16-35 2.8 coming, but that first one was amazing. for astrophotography, landscape photography. I've taken a ton of stuff with that lens. And then there's the really cool 12 to 24 2.8, which is extremely expensive, but also incredible image quality. It's honestly smaller and lighter than I would have thought for a 12 to 24. It's still pretty big and heavy, but if you look at the pictures, you're like, oh, that thing's a monster, and you pull it out of the box, you're like, oh, it's actually not that bad. So that's the 12 to 24 2.8 is really cool. And then they also have a 14 1.8. A prime I didn't mention on the Nikon side is the 20 1.8, which is my favorite wide angle lens. It's the main one I actually wound up using over the other ones. I can't believe I didn't mention it. I will throw up my favorite shot of it with that from San Juan Range Astro shot. So, but going back here, there's a 14 1.8 on Sony. That's extremely small. It's smaller than this lens, and the distortion on that lens is somehow extremely low. It's really cool. So the other thing we have to talk about is that in addition, so I've kind of covered all this native glass from the two companies, and you can see there's kind of a back and forth punch, like, oh, you're not going to lose out. The thing that Sony has that Nikon doesn't is an immense amount of third-party support. So you have a 14 to 24 Sigma, you have a 2470 Sigma, you have 100 to 400 Sigma that you could get for the A7R5 that are all very good image quality to my knowledge. I've used the 1424 a little bit and it seemed great. You have Tamron lenses. There's kind of the Nikon Tamron hybrids rolling out. So I think that, you know, in the next couple of years, those will kind of be the Tamron line will be on both systems. But so yeah, you have all that Sigma glass in addition, and then there's tons of other companies making cool glass, and Nikon is getting third-party lenses, but it's just at a slower rate because it just doesn't have the history with these companies. And the E mount's an open mount. Sony has opened it up, like anyone can kind of use it and design for it, whereas the Z mount is still like there's going to be some reverse engineering involved there. So that's kind of a look at the lens ecosystems of these two cameras. So now we are going to jump into the Summit Studios and do kind of a direct one-on-one body comparison and talk about some of the physical differences between these two cameras. After that, we're going to basically go into my office and start looking at images and comparing the actual images that we captured on this trip and see how we feel about the image quality differences. So before we go any further into this video, we need to talk about a couple of things about these cameras that seem obvious, but I think I need to discuss here. One is that the Z8 is maybe targeted to a slightly different audience than the A7R5. Now, I personally feel like the Z8 is the best landscape camera that Nikon is putting out right now, but it is a stacked sensor. It actually has no shutter at all. It's a stacked sensor, shutterless design. This is a more general purpose camera is what I'm trying to say. And even though there's similar price points, I think it wouldn't be totally fair to the Z8 to not acknowledge that while it is lower megapixel, it also is possibly more versatile. If you're a general shooter, I'd have a hard time and if you're a general shooter and you don't already have a system, I'd have a hard time not recommending the Z8 for, you know, shooting a lot of those things I just discussed: weddings, events, sports, wildlife, all that. That being said, at 61 megapixels, the A7R5 still keeps up. It has decent frame rate. The video features are very good. It has 8K as well, but it's not as well-rounded a camera. So in some ways, this whole comparison feels a little home field advantage-y for the A7R5 because, like, the landscape photography, studio photography, things like that are the target audience or target users of an A7R5. That being said, Nikon is marketing the Z8 heavily for landscape photographers. If you watched their launch event, they had a huge long section on landscape photography. I think they very much, that user group is a high value group, and Nikon is definitely targeting the Z8 to them. So I don't feel like this is an unfair comparison, especially considering that, like I said, I do think that this is the best landscape camera that Nikon's putting out right now. Just slightly better than the Z7 II. I think if you'd be more than happy with the Z7 II, but that's maybe a discussion for another day. So let's just talk about some of the body differences, design differences between these cameras, and some usability differences. So as you can see, one is significantly bigger than the other. The Z8 is bigger and heavier than the A7R5, which has its pros and its cons, right? Like, so if I'm holding it in my hand, this camera is more comfortable. The ergonomics are better. I've talked long about my dislike for Sony's general ergonomics. I feel like it's time maybe for a redesign on their base cameras at some point in the not too distant future. But so yeah, in hand, of course, this camera feels better. In my backpack, this camera feels better. It fits better in backpacks. It's more compact. The f4 standard zoom that I was using with it, the 20-70, is more compact. So this is a smaller and lighter system for sure, all the way around. You could get a pretty small and light system with Nikon, but it doesn't compare to what you're able to pull off with Sony. Then we can kind of go to kind of controls, right? So like there's ergonomics, how it feels in your hands, and then there's actually controlling the camera. The Z8, it has controls spread out all over the entire camera. There's buttons over here, there's buttons over here, there's, the right side, of course, and then there's buttons on the front. In contrast to that, a vast majority of the A7R5's controls are going to be on the right-hand side to be used with your right hand. That's how Sony has designed it. There's two buttons over here, very similar, but this whole area is completely devoid. There's no buttons on the front. There's two buttons on the top, a myriad of dials. And that's another huge difference is the Nikon system. Nikon has stuck to its guns. There's two dials on its cameras. That seems to be where they're going to stay forever, because I know that people have been wanting them to do since the way back in the DSLR days. They've been wanting a dial on the back like Canon, and Nikon hasn't done it, doesn't seem to want to do it, and that's fine. But I do love all of these great dials on the A7R5. You have a dial on the front, you have two dials on top, and you have another dial on back to assign to various functions. And dials are just a great way of quickly adjusting settings. Being able to have a devoted dial to ISO and exposure compensation readily available is fantastic. I should also bear mentioning that Nikon, on a lot of its lenses, most of its lenses, has a dial on it. I've talked about how I don't like that dial for stills photography because it's not clicky, it's super mushy, it's hard to get a dialed in setting. Sony has gone the route of, on many of its lenses, having a aperture dial. So that's nice. It even frees up another one of the dials on the camera. And most of their lenses have it now. Very oddly, the new 7200 f4 does not, which is very odd considering that like even the 20-70 f4 has one. So yeah, I think that's a little odd, but yeah. So that's kind of, when you're looking at controls, that's kind of the philosophy on the Sony is very right-handed, whereas Nikon utilizes the whole body for a variety of controls. The back screens, this is probably the most interesting and hard to decide thing, because, well, first off, as I mentioned out in the field, I like Nikon's back screen a lot better. It's bigger, it's brighter, it's sharper. It just looks better. The images just looked better as I was taking them on the back screen. It doesn't flip around, but it flips up like this, which is a feature I absolutely love. It just is so nice to shoot like this. The Sony A7R5 has possibly the most innovative back screen though that you can get, where it folds out like this, but it also flips around like this. So there's all kinds of angles. Now on the back of a tripod, do I prefer Nikon's to doing it like this? Yes, but only slightly. I feel like this is still very usable. Another advantage of this flip screen that Sony has is that you can close it off and protect it while it's in your bag, which is nice. That being said, I think at the end of the day, as far as user experience goes, I like Nikon's maybe a little bit better. But Sony's, I mean, this is really cool what Sony's doing with this back screen. All right, so viewfinders. I love the Z8's viewfinder. It's very bright. It has that, where it does that constant feed, its own feed. It's not using the same feed as the imaging feed. I like it. It's not very high res. It's 3 point something million dots. So it's not super high res, but I really do like it. The A7R5 viewfinder, it blows it out of the water. It's so good. It's so sharp. It's so lifelike. The quality is so cool with this viewfinder. It's not really a competition in the viewfinder game. The back screens is kind of a tit for tat a little bit, but the viewfinders, the A7R5 kills it. Now, usability of the camera. Let's talk about usability a little bit. So Nikon is a little old school in its usability, where it's kind of designed and laid out the camera to work a certain way. It has some function buttons, some customizable buttons. You have these two on the front. You have the record video button, and then you have one over here on the left. You can do some other creative things like with the display button, which if you watch my Z8 guide, you can see how I do that. But generally speaking, the Z8 functions as the Z8's designed to function. The function buttons are to do like certain user things that you might want to do, but generally speaking, you use the Z8 as the Z8 was designed by Nikon, which is not a bad thing. You have professional camera designers designing how to use the camera. It's not a bad way to go. With Sony, it's a completely different philosophy. You can customize this camera to no end, really. You could make it work however you want, with whatever configuration you want. Every button pretty much on the camera is customizable, changeable. You can do these things with the dials where if you hold a button down, it will do like literally like 4 different functions for each dial. It's really customizable, and I enjoy both. I really do. I love that the Z8, it's just a clean, straightforward experience. I'm able to get into the photography. I know and will remember, because like the downside of the customizability of the A7R5, right, is that like certainly if you hand it to somebody else, they're going to have no idea what to do. But even you, sometimes you're like, whoa, how did I customize this? Which button did I do to do that? It's easy to do that because it's so customizable. It really is, it's just an interesting how these companies are completely on the opposite ends of the spectrum. Like obviously the A7R5 comes out of the box with certain functionalities, but it just, you know, it's really designed to have you make it your own. So yeah, I feel like that's kind of a wash because I like both philosophies. I love that Nikon has included buttons on here, like the bracket button, like the white balance button, just right here. And you don't have to figure out where you're going to put those functions on the Sony, which is in a lot of ways what you have to do is you're like, okay, let's figure out how I want to change white balance. There's literally like 3 or 4 different ways to change the white balance on this camera, but I feel like that's very different functionalities. And I don't think, honestly, one is straightforwardly better than the other. At the end of the day, these two cameras. Oh, I guess one more thing. Let's talk about battery life. While just on the shoot at Frigid Air Pass, the Z8 used up, it went down to about 60% battery. We were shooting for about a half hour, maybe 45 minutes. It was on the whole time pretty much, but it went down to about 60% battery. The A7R5 went down to 98%. It lost 2% battery in the same amount of time. And that could have been for a variety of factors. They were both freshly charged, but that is just a picture of the battery life difference. The Z8, you have to babysit the battery. You can configure it where it won't burn the battery quite that fast. I have the viewfinder in high FPS mode. I have my screens pretty bright and all that stuff. So you wouldn't have to be that, but honestly, I want to use the camera the best that you could use a camera. I don't feel like crippling a camera so you get better battery life should be something you should have to do in 2023. So the battery life is another clear victory for Sony. All right, so media and storage. Once again, we have very different philosophies on these cameras and the media and storage. The Z8 has a SD card and a CF Express Type B card, so you have two different cards. The A7R5 supports two different cards too, but it supports, the card slots are dual function, so they both support SD cards and they both support CF Express Type A. It's hard to say exactly which one's better here. I think generally speaking, the consensus is that the Z8 should have had two CF Express Type B card slots, like the Z9. I personally love that it has an SD card slot because SD cards are so much more usable. There's readers built into computers. They're built into everything. You have a bunch of SD cards lying around. If for some reason you went out into the field and forgot your memory card, having an SD card that a readily available card type is good. So I don't know that I totally agree with that, but it's hard to argue with the usability of the two card slots with both types of media. That being said, the CF Express Type B is way faster than the CF Express Type A to like double. So it's a little bit of a, once again, it's a what's your preference, what's your need? Do you need a lot of speed and honestly reliability? I think the CF Express Type B is like one of the most reliable card types out there, versus being able to have two cards of the same type in the camera. I think it's kind of a personal preference thing. I think at the end of the day, I probably like Sony's solution maybe slightly better, but yeah, again, it's kind of a personal preference thing, and that's just a common theme here with these cameras, is that they're just different enough that it's hard to say one's better than the other. It's two different philosophies, and when you're picking these cameras, like, it's kind of which one do you align with more? Like, do you like a beefier camera with a top screen and controls all over it? Or do you like a smaller camera with controls that are focused on the right side of the camera that's super customizable? That's kind of what you're looking at with these two cameras. So that means that it's time to finally jump into probably the part of this video that you all came for, which is the image quality breakdown. How do the images look? Does 61 megapixels really make that big of a difference versus the 45 megapixels here? I guess I'm curious to see. So we're gonna jump into that segment now. Let's go. It's finally the moment you've all been waiting for. We are going to dive into image quality and try to answer the question of how big of a difference does the 61 megapixels of the A7R5 make versus the Nikon Z8. So a couple of quick things before we dive into the images. First thing is that I should just mention again that the Nikon is a stacked sensor. So just by the nature of it being a stacked sensor, there is probably a small dynamic range hit. But it also has a base ISO of 64. So because it has that lower base ISO, in theory, that may close the gap on the dynamic range. So they might, I'm guessing we have similar dynamic range here, but I'm not, I guess we'll see. So, and that kind of segues into what am I looking for when I'm evaluating the image quality of these images. So I'm looking for detail, sharpness, like how much detail I'm getting in the image. I'm looking for dynamic range. So that means, are my brights, like, does it hold detail in the brights and hold detail without much noise in the shadows? And then I'm also looking for color science. I'm looking for color differences, like which one has the probably subjectively better color. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Okay, so let's look at these first two images. The Sony is going to be on the left, the Nikon's on the right. I'll try to leave the labels visible where I can. And so right off the bat, part of the reason I chose this scene is because it is very high dynamic range. We have a very bright sky and a very dark foreground. And just looking at them right next to each other, it seems like the dynamic range is extremely similar. Let's go ahead and zoom in. So this is our first look at the detail and the detail differences. And it's there. I'm looking at this live with you. I'm evaluating this live with you. And I can say right now that, like, maybe it's not as big of a difference as I maybe thought it would be. So I see here there's more detail for sure on the Sony. Definitely different color choice. Now, this was a shifting light scene. I tried to switch the cameras as quickly as I could, but it's constantly shifting light. It was an actual landscape shooting environment that I was in, and it was chaotic. It was a blast, but it was chaotic. So this is not a scientific test, but it's almost as close as you're going to get in a landscape shooting environment, because both of these are, I would say, keeper landscape images. I mean, they might not be the best I've ever taken, but they're definitely good. So let's real quick jump into develop module, and let's see how the A7R5 retains detail in the foreground and in the sky. So this is horrible. This is not the edit I would like, but it kind of shows how much dynamic range was written into this file. And let's zoom in, and I mean, it looks great. Looks fantastic. The detail here is really nice. Yeah, it looks great. I think these lenses seem similar sharpness. So let's go over the Nikon and do the same thing to it. Up the shadows, drop the highlights. It looks different for sure. I'd say there's a little less dynamic range, maybe. You're losing maybe a little in comparison. It's, you know what, I take that back. It looks extremely similar. Let's actually look at them both again, side by side. And I mean, yeah, they're very similar. It's really just a color difference, and the A7R5 has a little more detail. I feel like there's a glow. No, it's kind of a wash, guys. Like, I feel like dynamic range, don't think that should be a major decision-making factor here. So let's look at another pair of images. I think just looking at these two, that we have a slight focal length difference. Yes, 68 millimeters versus 70 millimeters. That's okay. It's still close enough. And I also think that we had maybe a little bit more direct light here in the Sony, maybe just a little bit, but zooming in. So there you have it. It's the detail on the A7R5 is there. There's definitely more detail in the A7R5. I would be comfortable printing this single shot a little bigger, but not much. And honestly, you could probably print them the same size and not notice much of a difference. Again, I kind of feel like the megapixels is maybe not as big of a deal as I would have thought. Let's look at this area right here. Like it just doesn't look that much better. And I think, like I said, I think these lenses are similar sharpness. Looking at this area. So yeah, I think not a big difference here at all. Let's look at the next two. Now, with these ones, even just looking at the thumbnail, I can tell I definitely prefer how the Nikon colors on this one. The Nikon's, the Z8 file here, confirm, yeah. The Z8 file on the right here, the colors are way better. And, you know, again, the detail on the Sony is, and it's probably hard to see on YouTube compression, and I'm sorry for that, but like this is way more detailed. When you look at this scree slope here, it just is kind of turns into a tonal, kind of a muddy tonal thing where I can actually see like individual rocks and specks and stuff. There's just a level of detail on the A7R5 that is definitely fun. I definitely am enjoying looking at it. Is it make or break? No, I don't think so. I don't think it's, like I said, you might be able to print slightly bigger. Let's look at these two here. And here we have some exposure differences. It looks like the Nikon, the exposure was a 1/6 of a second versus a 13th of a second. So yeah, I guess, I mean, I think I intentionally zeroed out the meter on both of them, but there's an exposure difference here. So actually I will jump over here, select the Nikon and then the Sony and go to photo, develop settings, match total exposures. So this will help us evaluate maybe a little bit better. And on this one now, for some reason, the Sony is the warmer shot. And for this one, the meter said warmer on the Sony. So, and I like both. I feel like it's very similar to the first one. Now let's look the detail, the similar. I don't feel like dynamic range is a big issue. I don't feel like the resolution is as big of a deal as I would have thought. So I think where we're coming to is that these cameras both are creating incredible images. Okay, I thought it would be fun to visually demonstrate here because I'm just like looking at them side by side in Lightroom. You're not even getting that big of a difference. I thought it would be to visually demonstrate the actual difference in sizes. So I laid the Nikon image on top of the Sony image, and you can see that it's, there's more image. The Sony image is bigger for sure, but I wouldn't say, I feel like looking at it like this, it makes me feel a little more like that those megapixels matter. I don't know why. I think it's maybe just a visual thing more than anything, just seeing how much more image I'm getting. But at the end of the day, I don't think it's an amount that matters that much. On this one, I did the same thing, went ahead and loaded this up, and there's the Nikon, there's the Sony. So
yeah, there's a difference, but it's not. Kind of look at this Sony one. This one is very interesting to me, how different the color is and how much better the Nikon is. I feel like on this one it's kind of objective that the Nikon color is a little bit better, but it's the only one that I actually feel that way on. So let's jump back into Lightroom, and the last little thing I wanted to show to demo was I took panoramas with both of them. Now, by the nature of panoramas, it was I didn't take the time to do exact replicas. I just did as close as I could, just because the lighting was changing so much. So here's a Z8 panorama. Here is an A7R5 panorama, and you can see there is quite a big megapixel difference here. The A7R5 is 243. The Z8 is 182. So, a chunk more megapixels. And let's see how that translates. Whoa. Okay, so I don't know. This isn't scientific, right? This is just kind of interesting. But there's definitely more in these two panoramas. There's a significant difference here in and the framing is pretty similar. There's more sky in the Nikon, but otherwise I feel like the maroon bells are a little bit. Let's see the focal length. Actually, I'd be 105 versus 96. So, I mean, that's probably your difference right there, right? So, I like I said, I didn't do these ones as scientific. So that's your difference right there in resolution. But interestingly, the color science is very similar here. I feel like there's a hotter spot here on the Nikon, but it could have just been literally the sun shining a hotter spot. So, I'm both happy and sad that this is where we're at, because I'm happy because I can tell you can buy either one of these cameras and you're not missing out a huge difference in image quality, one versus the other. But I'm also sad because I feel like it's kind of a cop out to be like, well, it just is up to you, your personal preference. But that's what it seems like. I'm looking at these images and I'm like, sometimes I like the Nikon better. Sometimes I like the Sony better color wise. The detail, the Sony does have more detail, but it's not enough to have me go like, oh, well, no, I have to have the 61 megapixels. So, and then if you're shooting panoramas, the gap closes even more, I feel like. So the dynamic range, it's almost identical. So at the end of the day here, I actually think, interestingly enough, that the usability of the camera and the lens selection, like what lenses you're interested in, it matters more than the image quality. Looks like way more. I would say that the margin here is so small as to be negligible in my opinion, as to which one's producing better images. I don't think one's producing better images than the other. I think you have a little more detail on Sony, a little bit better color on the Nikon, and I feel like that evens out to kind of a wash in image quality. So I think that it really is going to come down to the usability, how the camera's designed, how it operates, and the lens system that you're more interested in matter way more than image quality in this case.
there you go. The Nikon Z8 versus the Sony A7R5. I genuinely hope that this video was useful to you as you evaluate these two cameras, or if you are a Nikon shooter or a Sony shooter, I hope you don't feel like I stepped on too many toes here with my discussions on these cameras. If this video was useful to you, please hit the like button. It really does help us out a lot, and our now very much growing channel will continue to grow the more interaction we have. You can comment below with your thoughts on either of these cameras. That's also super helpful. In the next couple weeks, so a real reason to subscribe. We already made a 3-hour guide on using the Nikon Z8 for landscape photography. That is out, it is available, it is linked in the description. So I really hope that you would check that out if you are a Nikon shooter. Really, if you're a Nikon shooter in general, I think there's a lot of value in that guide. And we are working on one for the A7R5, very similar. I don't know if it'll be 3 hours. Part of me hopes that I can get it under 3 hours. We'll see. That is in production right now and will probably be coming out in the next couple, in the few weeks after this video goes live. If you're watching this video way after it went live, then I will have the guide to the A7R5 linked below too. So, and honestly, if there's things that you would like in that guide, please comment below and we will try to integrate as much as we can, questions you might have, or things that you would like to see in that guide. Comment that below on the A7R5. So it would be great if you would subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you know when that guide goes live on the A7R5. And with that, we will see you on the next adventure.